Hey everyone, ready to get a little uncomfortable?
Well, I think we're all a little uncomfortable right now.
Good, because today we are diving deep into vulnerability
Oh yeah, this should be good.
with Brené Brown's Daring Greatly. You know that book Seth Godin called a game changer?
Oh yeah, and Gretchen Rubin said it changed her life.
That's the one. So we're going to unpack all of that.
All of what?
Why vulnerability is so powerful and how it can transform your life, your work, and even how you parent.
Ooh, that's a tall order.
It is.
Yeah.
But maybe, just maybe, we can figure out if we're actually daring greatly in our own lives.
That's a good question.
What do you think?
Well, Brown herself admits right off the bat.
What does she say?
I freaking hate vulnerability.
I think that resonates with a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
This idea that we should just embrace being vulnerable effortlessly.
Yeah, when it actually feels so raw and exposed.
Totally. It's like, sure, I'll just lay my heart out on the table for everyone to see. No big deal.
Right.
But then you read those descriptions of what vulnerability feels like to her research participants.
Uh-huh.
Taking off the mask, baring your belly to the enemy.
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying, and I think that's why her work is so powerful. She doesn't shy away from the messy reality of it.
She meets us right where we are, you know.
In the discomfort.
Yes, and reframes how we think about vulnerability. It's not weakness, it's the birthplace of courage and innovation and connection.
It's that tightrope walk.
Between courage and fear.
Okay, so it's powerful, but it's also scary. And I think a lot of that fear comes from shame. Shame is like that gremlin on your shoulder whispering all those nasty little doubts. You're not good enough, or what will people think?
Yeah, shame thrives in silence. And the less we talk about it, the more power it has over us.
Oh, interesting. So we have to talk about it.
Yes, but Brown found that one of the most powerful antidotes to shame is empathy. That Me Too moment. When we realize we're not alone.
When we realize we're not alone in our struggles.
Yeah, remember that story about the horseshit email?
Oh, yeah.
It's so relatable, right? We've all gotten that email or that text or that message that just cuts you to the core.
Uh-huh.
But when she shared that experience, the response was overwhelming. People flooded her inbox with their own horseshit stories.
It's like you're suddenly not alone. You're part of this community.
A tribe of perfectly imperfect humans just trying to figure things out.
And that sense of connection.
Gives you the courage to be vulnerable again.
To dare greatly.
Without being consumed by shame.
Okay, so we need to embrace vulnerability. Fight shame. But how do we actually do that? It's not like you can just flip a switch and suddenly become fearless and an open book.
You're telling me
Uh-huh.
it takes practice and awareness, and that's where Brown's vulnerability armory comes in.
This is where it gets interesting.
It's not about being vulnerable all the time with everyone.
Got it.
It's about understanding the defenses we use to protect ourselves.
So we can choose when and where to be vulnerable.
Exactly.
Okay, so this vulnerability armory.
This is filled with all the ways that we try to avoid vulnerability.
Think of it like a middle school locker room filled with all sorts of awkward and sometimes hilarious defenses.
Okay, I'm imagining it. Keep going.
Like one of the most common ones is foreboding joy.
Foreboding joy. Isn't that like an oxymoron?
Yeah, think about it. Have you ever been enjoying something and then you think, this is too good to be true, something bad's gonna happen?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like when Brown talks about standing over her sleeping children, feeling this overwhelming love.
Uh-huh.
And then suddenly her mind is flooded with these terrible images of something bad happening to them.
It's like we're trying to protect ourselves from the potential pain.
By minimizing the present joy.
Exactly. But the antidote, she says, is gratitude.
Gratitude.
Yeah.
So focusing on what you're thankful for in this moment instead of worrying about what might go wrong.
It's about shifting your focus from scarcity to abundance.
And that shift is key to disarming those defenses and opening ourselves up to vulnerability.
Okay, so gratitude can help us with foreboding joy, but what about perfectionism?
Well, isn't that kind of the opposite of vulnerability?
How so?
Because if I'm perfect, I don't have any weaknesses to expose.
It seems that way, right? But here's the thing. Perfectionism isn't about striving for excellence. It's a shield to protect us from shame.
So it's driven by fear, not a desire to be the best.
Exactly. And Brown quotes this amazing line from Leonard Cohen. He says, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in."
Oh, I love that.
Perfectionism tries to seal up all the cracks, but it's in those imperfections that our true beauty lies.
So instead of striving for this unattainable ideal of perfection, We should embrace our flaws and imperfections because that's what makes us unique.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress and that our worthiness isn't tied to our accomplishments.
This is so good. Okay, so we've got foreboding joy.
Yeah.
We've got perfectionism. What other weapons are in this vulnerability armory?
Well, there's one that I think we can all relate to, especially in today's world.
Yeah.
And that's numbing.
Numbing. I have a feeling I know where this is going.
It's about using anything to avoid those uncomfortable emotions.
Like work or food?
Food, alcohol, social media, even busyness itself.
Oh, the busyness, yeah.
It's that I'm fine facade that we put up when we're actually struggling.
I am the queen of numbing. Endless scrolling, Netflix binges, you name it.
It's so easy to check out when things get tough.
Oh, yeah.
And Brown is incredibly honest about her own struggles with numbing.
What did she say?
She talks about using smoking and drinking in social situations just to appear busy.
Wow.
It's that feeling of I'm not enough that drives so many of us to numb out.
That's really eye-opening. I think we underestimate the power of those underlying emotions.
Right, but the thing is, numbing only provides temporary relief.
Right.
It doesn't actually address the root of the problem.
It creates more distance between us and our true selves.
Exactly.
So how do we break free from those numbing behaviors? How do we stop numbing?
Brown emphasizes setting boundaries.
Boundaries.
Yes, and finding true comfort instead of numbing.
True comfort.
Yeah, learning to be present with your emotions, even the uncomfortable ones.
That sounds hard.
It is, but cultivating practices that nourish your soul, not just distract you.
Okay, so finding healthy ways to cope with discomfort rather than escaping it.
It's about recognizing that you are worthy of love and belonging just as you are, imperfections and all.
This is such a powerful reminder. Okay, so we've got foreboding joy, we've got perfectionism, we've got numbing. Are there any other defense mechanisms we should be aware of?
No, absolutely. There are a few more lurking in that vulnerability armory.
Okay, so tell me, what else is in there?
Well, we'll have to save those for later.
Oh, come on.
I don't want to overwhelm you. We've covered a lot already.
Okay, fair enough. It's clear that vulnerability is a complex topic.
But it's also empowering.
It is, and understanding these defense mechanisms is a huge step towards cultivating shame resilience.
And embracing vulnerability as a source of strength.
This is so insightful. I feel like I'm already starting to see these patterns in myself and in others.
That's great.
So we've explored the personal side of vulnerability, those internal battles with shame.
Yeah, those pesky gremlins.
But Brown also dives into how these dynamics play out.
How so?
In organizations and families, right?
Yes.
She talks about this concept of minding the gap.
Minding the gap? What's that all about?
That is a great question.
We can explore that next time.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
To mind the gap.
Okay, so minding the gap. Where do we even begin?
Well, it's about bridging the divide.
Bridging what divide?
Between our aspirational values, the things we say are important to us, and our practiced values, how we actually behave.
So it's about walking the talk.
Yeah.
Not just talking the talk.
Exactly, and it's about recognizing those gaps,
Between what we say and what we do.
Yes.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? It's not like you could just flip a switch and suddenly you're perfectly aligned with your values.
Right, it's a process.
Yeah.
And it starts with awareness and asking yourself tough questions.
What kind of tough questions?
Like, what are my core values? What do I really stand for? Am I actually living in alignment with those values?
Okay, that makes sense. But it also sounds a little scary. What if I realize I'm not living up to my own standards?
Well, that's the thing. It's not about judging yourself or striving for perfection. It's about recognizing those gaps and making conscious choices and extending ourselves some grace when we mess up.
Okay, I can get behind that. So give me an example. What's a common gap that people might encounter?
Let's say you value honesty. You're trying to teach your kids to be truthful, always do the right thing. But you're at the grocery store and your kid swipes a piece of candy.
Oh no, they didn't pay for it.
No. Do you address it or do you just kind of let it slide because you don't want to cause a scene?
Yeah, I think we've all been there. Those little white lies. Especially when you're tired or in a hurry. But those moments do matter, right, Dre?
They do. They either reinforce your values or expose the gap.
Between what we say and what we do.
Yeah. And even that small inconsistency sends a mixed message to your kids.
It's like saying, honesty is important, but only when it's convenient.
Exactly.
So how do we avoid those do as I say, not as I do moments? How do we actually bridge that gap?
It's about being intentional and holding yourself accountable. Those small moments, they're actually opportunities.
To model your values in action.
Yeah.
So Instead of ignoring the candy incident, I should stop, address it with my kid, and use it as a teaching moment about honesty and integrity.
Exactly. Walking the walk, even when it's uncomfortable, having tough conversations, it's easier to look the other way.
Okay, so honesty is one example. What are some other common gaps we should be aware of?
Another one is the gap between valuing respect and avoiding conflict.
What do you mean?
Like, you tell your kids to be kind and considerate, but then you struggle when they're being disrespectful or unkind to each other.
Oh, this one hits close to home. My kids are constantly arguing. It's so tempting to just tune them out. Tell them to figure it out themselves.
Conflict is uncomfortable, especially with our loved ones. Brown says those difficult moments are opportunities.
To teach them about boundaries and conflict resolution.
Yeah, to express their needs and boundaries in a healthy way.
Okay, so instead of shutting down the conversation, I should step in and help them navigate the conflict in a constructive way.
Create a safe space for them to work through these challenges.
Okay, it all comes back to creating a safe space. This is so insightful. You know, this whole minding the gap thing. It's not just about parenting, is it?
No, it applies to our work lives too.
Really?
In what way? Well, Brown says a lot of workplaces suffer from scarcity thinking. It's like that feeling of there's not enough to go around.
Not enough recognition, not enough resources.
Right, and that leads to competition, to distrust. People start protecting their turf.
So instead of collaborating, everyone's trying to get ahead.
Yeah, and that doesn't exactly foster vulnerability or creativity.
Okay, so how do we combat this scarcity thinking at work? How do we make things more collaborative?
Well, she suggests that leaders need to focus on rehumanizing the workplace.
Rehumanizing the workplace. What does that even mean?
It means creating an environment where people feel safe to be themselves, where they can share their ideas and take risks without fear of judgment. You know, think about companies that are known for being innovative and creative and having happy employees.
Okay.
What do they have in common?
Well, they seem to have a strong purpose. Like they're not just focused on profits. They're actually trying to make a difference. And they seem to value their employees. They make them feel appreciated.
Yes. Those are all key elements of rehumanizing the workplace. It's about acknowledging the impact of scarcity thinking, embracing vulnerability, and creating a culture where people can learn from their mistakes.
That sounds great in theory. But how do you actually create that kind of culture in a competitive work environment?
It starts with leadership. Leaders need to model vulnerability, authenticity, and compassion. They need to be willing to acknowledge their own mistakes, ask for help, celebrate the successes of others.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together. It's about creating a culture of trust, where people feel supported and safe to be vulnerable.
And when you have that kind of environment, amazing things happen. People are more engaged, more creative, and more productive.
And happier.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about recognizing and combating shame. But what are some other strategies for rehumanizing the workplace?
Another key element is normalizing discomfort. Growth and innovation, they require us to step outside our comfort zones. That's inherently uncomfortable.
You're telling me, I remember when I first started this podcast, I was terrified. I had no idea what I was doing and was sure I'd make a fool of myself.
But you did it anyway, and then look at you now. You're hosting this incredible podcast.
Well, I have an amazing expert to talk to, but you're right, discomfort often means we're growing and pushing ourselves.
Exactly, and good leaders can help their teams understand this. They need to create a culture where people feel safe to take risks and embrace challenges.
So it's about creating a safe space where it's okay to experiment and make mistakes.
Exactly. It's all about learning from our experiences. Another key aspect of rehumanizing the workplace is feedback.
Oh, feedback. That can be such a loaded topic. How do you make it less stressful and actually helpful?
Brown suggests approaching feedback from a place of shared humanity, remembering that we're all a work in progress, and framing feedback as a collaborative process, not a personal attack.
I love that. Feedback is a collaborative process, so it's about helping each other grow and learn.
Right. It's about moving away from that top-down model of feedback,
where the boss is the ultimate judge.
Exactly. And moving towards a more egalitarian process, where feedback is seen as a gift.
A gift. I like that. It really changes the perspective.
It does, but it requires vulnerability on both sides.
So the giver needs to be honest and constructive, and the receiver needs to be open to hearing it.
Yes, it's a dance, a delicate balance of honesty, empathy, and a commitment to growth.
Well said. Okay, so we've covered rehumanizing the workplace, but what about families? How do Brown's ideas about vulnerability and shame apply to parenting?
Well, she talks a lot about the importance of modeling worthiness for our children.
What does that mean?
It means showing our kids that it's okay to struggle, to make mistakes, to ask for help. We're not perfect.
So being authentic and vulnerable with our kids lets them see that it's okay to not be perfect.
Right, and it teaches them that their worthiness isn't based on their achievements or pleasing others. It's about fostering their sense of self-worth just for being them.
Not for what they achieve.
Exactly. Brown also says it's really important to create a sense of belonging in our families, letting our kids know they're loved and accepted unconditionally, no matter what.
So it's about creating a safe and supportive space where they can be themselves without fear of judgment.
Exactly. And that sense of belonging helps them build resilience to face life's challenges.
Okay, so modeling worthiness and fostering belonging, those are two key things. Are there any other insights about parenting that she offers?
She also talks about how important it is to let our kids struggle.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Isn't our instinct to protect them from pain and disappointment?
It is, but she argues that allowing them to experience adversity actually helps them develop and grow, to face those challenges and learn from mistakes.
So it's about resisting that urge to jump in and rescue them every time they hit a roadblock.
Yes, trusting their resilience, their ability to bounce back.
That's a hard balance, isn't it? Letting them struggle while still being there to support them.
It is, and Brown acknowledges that this can be one of the toughest parts of parenting.
It reminds me of the story she tells about her own daughter's swim meet, where she wanted to pull her daughter out of a race that was causing her anxiety.
Right, but she ultimately decided to let her daughter face that challenge.
It's a powerful example of the courage it takes to be a parent, to resist our own discomfort, and allow our kids to experience all of life, the good and the bad.
It's about trusting them to navigate those experiences.
So we've got modeling worthiness, fostering belonging, and letting them struggle. Any other key points about parenting?
One thing that stood out to me is how important it is to recognize and address shame in parenting.
Shame in parenting, what do you mean?
Well, Brown points out that parenting can be full of shame and judgment, both from ourselves and from others. It's easy to feel like we're not doing enough or that we're messing things up.
Oh, totally. It feels like there's this constant pressure to be the perfect parent, to make all the right choices, or else people will judge you.
Right, and Brown talks about how she felt shame when her daughter wasn't included in a promotional poster.
Oh, yeah. And Ellen comforted her by saying, "It's okay, Mommy. We're the others."
It's such a powerful example of how kids can teach us about compassion and acceptance.
It really is. So how do we combat shame in parenting? How do we create a more supportive environment for both ourselves and our kids?
Brown suggests starting with ourselves by cultivating shame resilience.
Shame resilience, how do we do that?
It's about practicing self-compassion, recognizing that we're all doing the best we can, and there's no such thing as a perfect parent. We're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable.
We need to give ourselves a break.
Yes. We also need to challenge those cultural norms that perpetuate shame and judgment in parenting.
It's about creating a community where parents feel safe to be vulnerable, share their struggles, and support each other.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together.
We are. You know, speaking of shared humanity, I'm curious about Brown's personal journey with this research. She mentions being rescued by the data. What did she mean by that?
Well, Brown started out studying connection and belonging, but she realized pretty quickly that shame was a major obstacle. And at first she was hesitant to really dive into it. It was uncomfortable for her. It triggered her own insecurities.
I can imagine. Shame is a tough topic for anyone.
Right, so she wasn't thrilled about exploring it, but the deeper she went, the more she saw how important it was to understand and even embrace shame.
It's like she discovered a whole new way of seeing the world and ourselves.
Exactly, and it's her willingness to share her own struggles that makes her work so relatable and powerful. She shows us that we're not alone in our struggles, that it's okay to be imperfect.
And that gives us the courage to try, to dare greatly, even when it's scary. It's funny how she started out researching connection, but ended up finding it in the most unexpected place in the study of shame.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, and how vulnerability, even in the face of shame, can lead to deeper connection and understanding.
It's like that Leonard Cohen quote, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." It's in those cracks, in those imperfections, that we find our humanity, our shared experience.
Beautifully said.
Well, I'm a little biased, but I think Brené Brown is pretty brilliant. This has been such an incredible deep dive into daring greatly. We've covered so much ground from shame and vulnerability to leadership and parenting.
We've explored the vulnerability armory, unpacked those sneaky defense mechanisms, and learned how to mind the gap in our families and organizations.
And most importantly, we've been reminded that daring greatly is not about being perfect. It's about embracing our imperfections, showing up authentically, and living and loving with our whole hearts.
It's about choosing courage over comfort, even when it's hard, even when our gremlins are screaming at us to stay small and safe.
And it's a choice we can make every single day, in big ways and small.
So as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with a challenge. What's one small act of vulnerability you can commit to this week? What's one step you can take to step outside of your comfort zone and embrace your imperfections?
It could be as simple as saying, I love you to someone you care about, or as bold as sharing a creative project you've been working on. It could be asking for help when you're struggling, or setting a boundary with someone who's been taking advantage of your kindness.
Whatever it is, choose courage over comfort. Choose vulnerability over self-protection.
And remember, you are not alone on this journey. We're all in this together, all striving to dare greatly and live more wholeheartedly.
So go out there and dare greatly. The world needs your vulnerability, your authenticity, your unique light.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep daring greatly.